I thank my right honourable. Why don't you just take him? I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. Will the right honourable friend agree that this Santa Claus letter of the deal offers no protection for workers' rights, for jobs, for the environment, for frictionless trade? Vote it down.
Mr. Speaker, my friend is right, because what this deal doesn't do is ensure that if there are changes across the EU in improvement of workers' rights and conditions, they're necessarily mirrored in this country. And when the Prime Minister talks so grandly about workers' rights in this country, what comes to my mind is 1 million people on zero-hours contracts. What comes to mind is people trying to make ends meet by doing 2 or 3 jobs just to feed their children. The Prime Minister states that the transition period ends, as I said, in 2020. Article 132 actually says this can be extended for up to 2 years to December 2022. The Business Secretary is already clear it's likely to be extended to that period, and under this bad deal we'd have to pay whatever the EU demands to extend it for those 2 years. Under this deal, in December 2020, we will be faced with a choice, Mr. Speaker. Either pay more and extend the transition period, or fall into the backstop. At that point, Britain would be over a barrel. We would have left the EU, have no UK rebate, and be forced to pay whatever was demanded. Alternatively, Article 185, the Northern Ireland Protocol, the backstop, would apply. Not only would that mean Northern Ireland would be subject to significantly different regulations than the rest of the UK, but the EU has a right of veto over the UK's exit from the backstop arrangement. Far from taking back control, this is actually handing control to somebody else, which is what the Prime Minister is asking us to support today. Whether in a backstop or an extended transition, the UK would have no say over the rules. We could, by that time, have already given up our seat on the Council of Ministers, our Commissioner and our MEPs, without having negotiated any alternative say in our future. This government is not taking back control, it is losing control. No wonder.
In terms of control, the one item that is in control of all of us is which way we vote on Tuesday. The Right Honourable Leader of the Opposition has said he does not want no deal. The EU leaders have made it clear it is this deal or no deal. Does he realise that it will be his vote that pushes us into no deal? Because that is what it is asking us to do.
Mr Angus Brendan McNeill.
Speaker, I distinctly heard Donald Tusk at the weekend saying the options are no Brexit, no deal or this deal. So to say it's a binary choice is not right.
I'm extraordinarily grateful for the honourable gentleman's elucidation, but that intervention suffers from one notable disadvantage, and that is that it wasn't even tangential to being a point of order. The honourable gentleman's intervention and points of order are not even nodding acquaintances in my experience. Mr Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr Speaker, it really is not credible for the government to come to this House with this deal that does damage a great deal of our economic interests, that does reduce our powers to decide our relationships in the future, does damage our trade, and then say there's no alternative. This House will make its decision next Tuesday. I hope and expect this House will reject that deal. At that point, the government has lost the confidence of the House. I think they should reflect on that. Either they've got to get a better deal from the EU or give way to those who will. And no wonder the Science Minister, the member for East Surrey, resigned, saying this deal will cost us, and I quote, our voice, our vote and our veto.
The opposition.
Chris, come over here.
It is so emphatic that we won't have a no-deal exit if we reject the Prime Minister's deal. What deal does he suggest we're going to put in place between now and March of next year, which will avoid that?
Well, Mr. Speaker, if the House rejects this deal, as I hope it will, it's then up to the government to go back and negotiate something like a new comprehensive customs union, which would be backed by both the TUC and the CBI, which is necessary to defend jobs and also have access to a strong single market. We cannot be told this is the only thing we can do. The process of negotiation is to be accountable. The government is going to be held to account. I hope this deal is rejected, in which case we will force the government to go back and negotiate. The last 2 years, Mr. Speaker, the last 2 years. Oh, all right, yes, okay.
I want to hear the intervention. A lot of noise. Mr. Christopher Leslie.
Very grateful. Actually, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to agree with my honourable friend that I agree this is a bad deal. Doesn't he agree that our country would be better off remaining in the European Union than exiting on the basis of this deal?
Mr. Speaker, the referendum took place. We fought the election respecting the result of the referendum. We are opposed to this deal. We think there is the possibility of getting an agreement which would be better for this country and give us the control which is not by this government's proposals to us. The last 2 years gives us no confidence that the government can do a deal in under 2 years, taking us up to the transition period. So at some point before December 2020, the focus would then inevitably shift from negotiations on the future relationship to negotiations on an extension of the transition period, including negotiating what further payments we would have to make to the EU. So, Mr. Speaker, we are over a barrel, either paying whatever is demanded or negotiating away fishing rights or who knows what else. This is a terrible failure of negotiation by this government. Should the backstop come into force?
I thank the right honourable friend for giving way. Would you agree that the Prime Minister will not take her political declarations for this deal to the people because she is afraid that her Brexit ship would sink?
Well, we will know the outcome of that next Tuesday when the vote takes place in this House, but any analysis of this deal would show it's unacceptable and should be defeated in this House. Should the backstop come into force, there is no time limit or end point. It locks Britain into a deal from which it cannot leave. Remember that, it cannot leave without the agreement of the EU.
I'm grateful to the Right Honourable giving way. I wonder if he could, following his answer to his Right Honourable friend, could he now clarify? He says that the Labour Party stood on a manifesto that accepted the result of the referendum, and he was clear on that. And yet since then we know the member for Hayes and Harlington has suggested that the Labour Party's position would now be to support a second referendum. Would he now clarify, for the sake of the House, is the Labour Party's position to support a second referendum, or is it that they accept the result of the first referendum and will not support a second referendum?
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the member for Chingford has read the Labour manifesto with great caution and detail. Oh, he did. We were quite clear that we respected the result of the referendum, and in our conference motion we discussed the whole issue at great length, and our party agreed at the largest Labour Party conference ever held in our party's history unanimously to back the composite motion that we put forward, which did which did oppose this process which the government is putting forward, and suggests that if the government can't govern, and it looks increasingly like it can't, then it should make way and have an election. That is our priority. Should the backstop come into force, there is no time limit or end point. It locks Britain into a deal from which it cannot leave, as I said. This is, I believe, the first time ever, as was said yesterday in questions to the Attorney-General, the first time ever in the history of this country that we've signed up to a treaty that we could not leave out of our own volition. That is quite a serious indictment of this government. And in the backstop, restrictions on state aid are hardwired with an arbitration mechanism. But no such guarantee exists for workers' rights. New state aid rules could be brought in whether they were in Britain's interest or not. The Attorney-General made that very, very clear yesterday.
Order, just order. Don't need to have a bickering between members of the same party as to whom the Leader of the Opposition is giving way to. I think it is the honourable gentleman from Anhelion and Yar who's been invited to intervene. But just before he does, order. I should just remind colleagues, that it is legitimate to use mobile devices without impairing decorum. But it has just been brought to my attention there is a very widespread use of them, and I would just gently remind colleagues that they most certainly should not be taking photographs in the chamber. Yeah, no, I know exactly what I'm doing and what I'm saying and upon what advice. It requires no comment or contradiction, simply a recognition of the validity of the point. Mr. Angus Brendan McNeill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the honourable gentleman for giving way as well. The honourable gentleman talks about respecting the referendum. Fair enough, that's his point of view. I've got a different respect in Scotland. But the question I want to ask him is, will he respect the mandate that the Scottish Government has and the Scottish Parliament's will to have a second independence referendum? How far does his respect go?
Well, it's not actually relevant to this debate today, Mr. Speaker. We are talking about the deal that the government has brought back, and that's what the debate is about. In the backstop of the regulatory frameworks dealt with by non-regression clauses are non-enforceable by EU institutions or by arbitration arrangements, and will give the government the power to tear up workers' rights, damage environmental protections and consumer safeguards.
Will he give way on that point? Isn't one of the most extraordinary things about the debate so far that we've not had a single mention of the word immigration? And yet it was meant to be one of the most important aspects of the referendum. The government hasn't even published an immigration bill. We don't know what our immigration policy will be next year. And don't we really want to stand up for the rights of young British people to be able to study, work, live elsewhere in the European Union? Because it's British people who've used it more than any other country in Europe.
I'm coming to that in my speech, but I just say absolutely. Young people need that right to travel, need that right to be able to study, and I think the Erasmus scheme has actually worked very well, giving opportunities for a lot of people to study. And I'll come on to this again, but I just think we should reflect on the massive work done by European Union nationals who've come to make their homes in this country and helped us developed our health service and many other services. The backstop would apply separate regulatory rules to Northern Ireland. This is despite the fact that the Prime Minister said this is something, and I quote, no UK Prime Minister could ever agree to. Another of her red lines breached. In fact, the list of the EU measures that continue to apply to Northern Ireland runs to 75 pages of the agreement.
Would my right honourable friend agree with me that this is a bad deal? And one of the reasons for that is the Prime Minister has spent much of the 2.5 years discussing the deal with her colleagues on the Conservative Party rather than negotiating with the European Union.
My friend is so right. This has been a negotiation with the Cabinet, it's been a negotiation with Conservative MPs, it's been a negotiation within the Conservative Party. That's where all the concentration has been, and indeed one of the Brexit secretaries hardly ever never went to Brussels anyway, presumably being more interested in arguments within the Conservative Party. It's also clear that the Prime Minister's red line regarding the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice has been torn up. Under the Prime Minister's plan, by 2022, we will either be in a backstop or still in transition, where we will continue to contribute to the European Union budget and follow the rules overseen by the European Court of Justice. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, the Foreign Secretary said on the 25th of November only that the deal largely ends the jurisdiction of the ECJ. It is crystal clear that the Prime Minister's claim that this plan means we take control over our laws, money and borders is utterly far-fetched. On the future partnership, Mr. Speaker, let's be clear. There isn't a deal. There's a framework for a future partnership. Our trading relationship with Europe is still to be negotiated, and it will take years to do that. We still don't know what our long-term relationship with Europe would look like, and that's why so many MPs across Parliament are not willing to vote for this blindfold Brexit and take a leap in the dark about Britain's future. There is no mention of the Prime Minister's favoured term, implementation period, anywhere in the 600 pages of the withdrawal agreement. And no wonder. There is precious little new to implement spelt out either in the agreement or in the future partnership. The agreement does call for a transition period, but there is nothing to transition to. It's a bridge to nowhere. As the 26-page document says, it can lead to a spectrum of different outcomes, as well as checks and controls. And we're expected to endorse that as a basis of our future relationship with the European Union. After 2 years of negotiations, all the government has really agreed to is a very vague wish list. And, Mr. Speaker, only three of its 26 pages deal with trade. It's not a trade deal. It's not even close to a trade deal. The trade deal recently signed between the EU and Canada took 7 years to negotiate and ran to 1,600 pages. In 2.5 years, this government has agreed to 3 pages of text on trade. It's hardly an encouraging start to future trade relationships. The former Brexit Secretary committed to, and I quote, detailed, precise and substantive document. We had the right to expect one. What we got contains no mention of frictionless trade, promised at Chequers, or even trade as frictionless as possible, promised before that. There is no ambition to negotiate a new comprehensive customs union with a British say that would protect jobs, trade and industry, and so uncertainty continues for business.
Does my right honourable friend agree with me? Does my right honourable friend agree with me that this deal does not deliver frictionless trade, and that this would have a negative impact on the economy and risk jobs as well?
No, it certainly doesn't deliver frictionless trade, and those working in industry are extremely worried about what's going to be happening in the future, because they don't see this deal as protecting their jobs or their future. The demand for a new comprehensive customs union is one that has united both the CBI and the TUC because it protects manufacturing supply chains. The decision to rule out a customs union and the lack of clarity in the deal risks business investment being deferred on an even greater scale than it is at the moment, costing jobs and living standards. And many companies may decide the lack of certainty means they will explore their contingency plans to relocate elsewhere. Both the First Ministers of Wales and of Scotland have also made clear to the Prime Minister that they would support participation in a customs union to protect the economy and jobs. A commitment to a new and comprehensive customs union could, I believe, have found support in this House. The government didn't seek it.
I thank the Leader of the Opposition for giving way. The Leader of the Opposition talks about uncertainty, but I put to him just one example as to why I would encourage him to support the Prime Minister's deal, and it's this. If that deal does not go through, we could face a situation at 11:01 p.m. on the 29th of March where 1 million UK citizens living in the EU27 will no longer have their rights guaranteed. What would he do in that position?
I would imagine the honourable member supports the Prime Minister's deal because he is incredibly loyal to his party, with a blindness about the dangers of this deal to the rest of the country and the jobs that go with it. The lack of clarity around these proposals also means there is no guarantee of a strong deal with the single market to ensure continued access to European markets and services, merely a vague commitment to go beyond the baseline of the World Trade Organization. As both the Attorney General and the Environment Secretary have made clear in recent days, the commitments to workers' rights, environmental protections and consumer safeguards are very, very far from secure. Mr. Speaker, the social Europe that many people supported and continue to support was not part of why people voted to leave. All of that is at risk from this deal. This deal fails to give so many economic sectors and public services clarity about our future relationships with several European Union agencies and programmes. Take, for example, the Galileo programme. Caroline.
I'm grateful to him for giving way. On the environment, would he agree with me that the Prime Minister's deal seriously undermines environmental protection in this country because it does not replace the European Court of Justice with anything like the strength of an enforcement body? Instead of the promised watchdog, we've got much less than just a lapdog.
The member is absolutely correct, because the environmental protections that we have are obviously essential. You cannot protect the environment inside national borders. It has to be done across national borders, and we have to have the toughest possible environmental protection regulations. The suspicion that many of us have is that there's an appetite on that side of the House to remove many of these protections as time goes on.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. On the point of environmental protections and other protections, which is so important, does he agree with me that the government's obsession on clamping down on foreign aid, state aid, is something that is the wrong focus, and they should be focusing on all of the protections that we're bringing up right at this moment in time?
Mr. Speaker, the state aid rules of the European Union are something this government has been very, very happy to sign up to, and indeed used that as a means of not defending the steelworks at Redcar when they could have done something about it and defended those jobs in Redcar at that time. It's the failure of this government to do anything to protect those steelworks and those jobs that they should be condemned for. And I thank my friend for his intervention and the work that he did to try and protect those jobs. Take, for example, Mr. Speaker, the Galileo programme, to which the UK has so far contributed £1.2 billion. But now we seem set to walk away from it. Then there is a lack of clarity about whether we will continue to participate in the European Arrest Warrant, Europol or Eurojust. The Chequers proposal argued for the UK maintaining membership of the European Aviation Safety Agency and the European Medicines Agency, but the future partnership merely allows for cooperation.
I thank the right honourable member for giving way. Thank you, Chair. Does my right honourable friend agree that while the Prime Minister seems proud to claim freedom of movement has ended, she can't tell us what it will be replaced with? Is it not right that we see the government's immigration white paper before the meaningful vote?
I'm coming on to that in just 1 second. We lack we lack similar clarity about many others, including Horizon 2020, Erasmus, mentioned by my friend, which have been so brilliant in providing students with opportunities to study in other countries. That is why so many young people are so concerned at this present time about what is happening. And, Mr. Speaker, there is no clarity about any future immigration system between the UK and the European Union. And it now seems the immigration white paper we were promised in December 2017 won't even appear in December 2018. Following the disgraceful Windrush scandal, many prospective migrants will have no confidence in the ability of this government to deliver a fair and efficient system.
Thank you, my right honourable friend, for giving way. And thank you for mentioning immigration. Immigration is a serious thing that our young people are concerned about, and especially to do with Brexit. But because you've mentioned the Windrush scandal, do you agree that lessons learned is not good enough? We need a public inquiry to really understand the Windrush scandal and the hostile environment. And when we get this, we will understand more about how the government is committed to immigration and getting things right, especially at times like this.
I thank my friend for her intervention, and as the daughter of a Windrush generation migrant to this country, she fully understands how horrible it felt in her community when this Prime Minister, as Home Secretary, deliberately created the hostile environment which was so damaging to community relations all across our country. And many EU nationals already here have no faith in this government to manage the process of settled status fairly or efficiently. These are people who contributed to our country, to our economy, to our public services and especially our NHS. We all meet them in hospitals and doctor surgery. It's these people who are now so anxious about their future. Mr. Speaker, to our negotiating partners in the European Union, I say this. We understand why, after 2 years of negotiations, you want this resolved. But this Parliament represents the people of this country, and the deal negotiated by this government is not good enough for the people of this country. So if Parliament votes down the deal, then reopening negotiations cannot and should not be ruled out. There is a deal that I believe can win the support of this House and bring the country together, based on a new comprehensive and permanent customs union with a UK say, and real protection of workers' rights and environmental and consumer safeguards. Mr. Speaker, as I conclude, I've been very generous, Mr. Speaker, in giving way, particularly to that side. As I conclude, Mr. Speaker, as I conclude, I want to pay tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Holborn and St Pancras, a shadow Brexit secretary, and his team of shadow ministers. He's now facing his third Brexit secretary. He's stayed the course, holding this government to account. And I thank him and his wonderful team and their supporters for what they've done, and the success today in forcing the government to release the legal advice they were trying to withhold from us. This is not the deal the country was promised, and Parliament cannot, and I believe will not, accept it. The false choice between this bad deal and no deal will also be rejected. People around the country...
The Leader of the Opposition is not currently giving way. He's developing his point. No, he's developing his point. Members don't need to set themselves up as though they're conducting an orchestra. It is not necessary. Mr Hoare, for example, you're an incorrigible individual. Your assistance in this matter is not required. I'm afraid you're a veteran of Oxford Union badinage, and you've never really overcome it, I think. Jeremy Corbyn.
As I said, Mr. Speaker, this is not the deal the country was promised, and Parliament cannot, and I believe will not, accept it. The false choice between this bad deal and no deal will also be rejected. People around this country are very anxious businesses and workers are anxious about the industries they work in, the jobs they hold, and about the stability of this country. I've given way a great many times, and I'm going to draw my remarks to a close very soon. The responsibility, Mr. Speaker, for this state of anxiety lies solely with this government. 2 years of botched negotiations have led us here today. Members of this House have a very important decision 1 week today. To vote for this deal would be to damage our economy, to make our constituents poorer, and to take a leap in the dark with the future of this country. Don't take my word for it. The government published its own economic assessment, which found the Chequers proposals would make our economy nearly 4% smaller than it would otherwise be, thus knocking 100 billion out of our economy within 15 years. For those who like to break down these sorts of figures into weekly amounts, that's nearly 2 billion a week less. And that definitely was not seen on the side of a bus. Mr. Speaker, Labour will vote against this deal. A bad deal for Britain, a bad deal for our economy, and, I believe, a bad deal for our democracy. Our country deserves better than this.
Mr. Boris Johnson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It is perfectly clear from listening to the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Leader of the Labour Party, that he is joining with his Shadow Chancellor and his Shadow Brexit Secretary, and now determined to frustrate Brexit and the result of the referendum in 2016. It's absolutely clear from what he said just now. But I must regretfully say to my Right Honourable friend, the Prime Minister, I really can't believe that there is a single member of this House who sincerely believes that this deal we have before us is a good deal for the UK. And if I may say, you can tell, there we go, there's one. There's one. There's one. And I must say, I said sincerely. I said sincerely. I said sincerely. And you can tell that the government's heart...
Order. Forgive me. Oh, sorry. Point of order, Mr. Edward Vasey.
I sincerely believe it. I've got no stake in this government anymore, but I still think it's the right thing to do.
Mr. Boris Johnson.
In which case, I'm happy to acknowledge the sincerity of my honourable friend, but I have to say that I think the government's heart does not appear to be in this deal, and I think listening to those who are sent out to defend it and to explain it, they know that it is a democratic disaster. In fact, after 2 years of negotiation, as has already been said, I think it has achieved an extraordinary thing in the sense that it has brought us together, finally. It has brought us together in the sense Remainers and Leavers, myself, Tony Blair, we are united. The whole Johnson family is united in the belief that this is, I'm afraid, a national humiliation that makes a mockery of Brexit. And I'm sorry to say this, these are hard truths, but there will be no proper free trade deals as a result of this deal. We will not take back control of our laws. And for the government to continue to suggest otherwise is to do violence to the natural meaning of words. We will give up £39 billion for nothing. We will not be taking back control of our borders, Mr. Speaker. Not only have we yet to settle the terms on which the EU migrants will in future come to this country, but we will be levying EU tariffs at UK ports and sending 80% of the cash to Brussels. In short, we are going to be rules takers. We are going to be a de facto colony. And out of sheer funk, I'm sorry to have to say this to us, we are ensuring that we will never, ever be able to take advantage of the freedoms that we should have won by Brexit. And under the terms of the backstop, we have to stay in the customs union, while Northern Ireland, and therefore the rest of the UK, if we want to keep the union together, will stay in regulatory alignment unless and until the EU decides to let us go. And why should they let us go? By handing over £39 billion, we lose all our leverage in the talks. With a £95 billion surplus that they have with us in goods alone, the EU has absolutely no interest or incentive to allow us. I will happily give way.
I'd like to thank the right honourable member for giving way. The Prime Minister gave us 7 reasons why the EU will not be using this backstop. The Attorney General yesterday made it completely clear that the backstop, if it ever came to place, would be challengeable under EU law itself. I say to my greatly respected colleague that I think he is promoting Project Fear, because what is his option?
Order, resume your seat. I'm sorry to have to bark at the Honourable Lady, but the intervention was just too long. End of. No, enough. Boris Johnson.
A very good point, nonetheless, Mr. Speaker, because it's exactly on the point. Because as I've been saying, the EU has no incentive whatever to let us out of this backstop, precisely because they have this massive trade surplus with us. And furthermore, they have, when they look at UK manufacturing and UK business, they realise that they will have, in that backstop and through the whole of the implementation period and beyond, unchecked and unmediated power, effectively to legislate for the UK, with no UK representation. And if the Honourable General Opposite thinks that's an ideal situation for this country to end up in, then let him speak now.
The Right Honourable Member talks about an ideal situation. The Right Honourable Member was a senior member of Vote Leave. He was Foreign Secretary for 2 years. We are in this mess because of him. Does he take no responsibility?
I do not. I'm grateful to the honourable member, but the fact is that I'm afraid I was not able to continue to support this process for precisely that reason. They know if the House will allow me, I will just make some progress. They know that having that regulatory control over us, they would have no incentive, as it were, to take the foot off our neck. And they will have us in permanent captivity as a memento mori, as a reminder to the world of what happens to all those who try to leave the EU. And this is a recipe for blackmail, and it is open to any member of the EU to name its price. If my honourable friend will allow me, I'll just make some progress. To name its price for Britain's right to leave the backstop. The Spanish will make a play for Gibraltar, the French will go for our fish and for our bankers, the Germans may well want some concessions on the free movement of EU nationals, and so it goes on. I'll give way in just a second. The worst of it is that we have not even tried properly to leave. And the worst, or shown any real interest in having a different future. And I will give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. The Prime Minister at the dispatch box today was generous. She made very clear that for us to unify the country, we have to bring the 48% that voted to stay as well as the 52. Can I ask my right honourable friend, someone that was regarded in London as a unifying political figure, what would he do to bring the 48 and the 52 together?
I think that as I say, Remain and Leave have been to a very large extent united in their dismay at what I think is a wholly undemocratic deal. And the thing that really pains me, and the gentleman opposite asked about the role of ministers in this. And I have to say that we on the UK side of the negotiation, I think, have been responsible for forging our own manacles, in the sense that it's almost as though we've decided that we needed to stay in the customs union and in the single market in defiance of the wishes of the people. And we should be careful about... I'll give way to my honourable friend behind me who's been chuntering away from a sedentary position from behind. I'll give way in a minute. We should be careful about claiming any kind of subterfuge. But it is very hard to understand how... We've lost 2 Brexit secretaries in the course of these negotiations. It's very hard to understand how the former Secretary of State for the Department for leaving the EU could have been kept in the dark about the crucial addition to paragraph 23 of the political declaration, my honourable friend, where this country agreed, in paragraph 23, apparently without the knowledge of the elected politician concerned, that our future relationship would be based on the backstop. No one campaigned for that outcome. No one campaigned, no one voted for this type of Brexit. This isn't Brexit. This is not Brexit, but a feeble simulacrum of national independence. It is a... I'll give way in a second to this gentleman here. It is a paint and plaster pseudo-Brexit. And beneath the camouflage, we find the same old EU institutions as the customs union and the single market, adjudicated, by the way, by the European Court of Justice. If we vote for this deal, we will not be taking back control, but losing control.
I'm very grateful to the right honourable gentleman for giving way. He appears to be one of those who prefers the grievance to the solution. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has come up with a solution. What's his big idea?
I was coming to that, Mr. Speaker. You anticipate.
Order! Members must not shout across the chamber at the right honourable gentleman. It's extremely unseemly. Order! I've no doubt that the right honourable gentleman is well able to look after himself. I'm not really concerned about him. I'm concerned about the reputation of the House. Boris Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, well, I've been told by your leave that I have an unlimited time to speak, so I will come to the solution that my honourable friend craves in just a minute, because the solution is, in fact, very... I'll just make some progress. If we vote for this deal, we are not taking back control. Indeed, I would say to colleagues, friends across the House of Commons, I would say that we are part of a representative democracy, and voting for this deal will be not just, as it were, turkeys voting for Christmas. It's actually worse than that. There is a sense in which, of course, we would be voting for Turkey, or Turkish, as my right honourable friend. That's exactly true. That is exactly true. We'll be voting for Turkey in the sense, or Turkish-style membership of the customs union, obliged to watch as access to the UK market is traded by Brussels, but with no say in the negotiations. And of course, the kicker is that with its veto, the EU ensures that the backstop they impose on us is more subservient even than the arrangements that the Turks have. And it's a wonder, frankly, that's absolutely true, it's a wonder that any democratic politician could conceivably vote for this deal. And yet I know, one second, and yet I know that many good colleagues are indeed determined to do so, in the belief that we have no alternative, or that we've run out of road, and, as we've heard earlier on, that Brussels will offer us nothing else. And I want respectfully to deal with those anxieties, which I'm sure my honourable friend shares.
Very grateful. Given that my right honourable friend appears to be unwilling to enter into an understanding of what negotiation is, can we take it from that my right honourable friend has actually only ever meant that no deal is a good deal, because he does not believe in having a deal with an institution which he is philosophically opposed to, and windmills that he tilts at every turn.
I may say with great respect and admiration to my honourable friend, I do not philosophically oppose the European Union. I simply think that membership of the European Union for the purposes of the UK is no longer right. And that was what I campaigned on, and I think it was, and I think the British people were completely right. As for no deal, no, I don't believe that no deal is the option that we should be going for automatically. But I will come to that in just a minute. I want to deal with these anxieties, but I know that my honourable friend shares, because I do think that he is profoundly mistaken, as indeed are all colleagues, in thinking that we have absolutely no option but to go ahead on this basis. We have plenty of other options. And I think in order to see the way ahead, we need to understand what happens on Tuesday, next Tuesday, if, as I very much hope, this great House of Commons votes down this deal. And I'll tell you what happens. You've got to put yourself in the mind of our counterparts across the table in Brussels, because I tell you, in Brussels, they think they've got us beat. They do. They think that our nerve will eventually fail. They think that the Prime Minister will come to the summit next week, and in the event of this deal being voted down, and ask for some cosmetic changes. And I expect that they will think about granting some cosmetic language that is intended to be helpful, but which does not change the legal position. And I think in Brussels they are confident that sometime before March next year the government will come back to this House, and they think that this deal will go through somehow or other, by hook or by crook. Because, as everybody keeps saying, there is allegedly no alternative, and the Norway option will be seen for what it is, an even worse solution than what is currently proposed. The notion of extending Article 50, delaying the date of Brexit, would be greeted, I think, with fury by the electorate, as indeed would any attempt to amend the terms of exit so as to plunge us back into the customs union. That would be rumbled by the electorate as well. So I will give way with pleasure to my honourable friend.
Thank you very much, my honourable friend. Is he not concerned that trying to win 7-0 he may lose 4-3?
I understand exactly the analogy that he speaks of, but I've heard it said by defenders of the government that we may be 1-0 down at the end of this first half of the negotiation, but that we're going to win 2-0 or 2-1 by the end. And I have to say that I don't see it that way. If we go on like this, with the backstop in the way that it is, I believe that we will be thrashed out of sight. And I have to say that I will come to Carol in a minute. I think I've already given way to you. Mr. Speaker, I will come to Carol in a minute. Having studied the UK negotiating style in detail, I don't think that they believe we...
There is excessive noise in the chamber. My understanding, insofar as I can hear, is order! Calm yourself. Is that Mr. Johnson is not currently giving way. Boris Johnson.
Given way, I think the House will agree quite a lot so far. And I'm very happy to give way in the future. But I just want to come to the point that has been raised by honourable friends around this. Just one second. They think that we've got nothing left in our tank, and they think that we want to do a deal at any price. And I think that now is the time, as we all think about this vote and what we are individually going to do, now is the time, thinking about the attitude in Brussels towards us, for us to show that they grossly underestimate this country and this House of Commons and our attachment to our liberties, because there is and there is another way, and we should not pretend after 2 years of wasted negotiations that it is going to be easy, but it is the only option that delivers on the will of the people, but I believe also maintains our democratic self-respect as a country. And that is to say, what is obvious from this debate and from every poll that I have seen, we should go back to Brussels. We should go back to Brussels and we should say to them, yes, we want a deal if we can get one. And yes, there is much in the withdrawal agreement that we can keep, notably the good work that has been done on citizens. Notably the good work that is done on citizens. And a gentleman opposite, a gentleman comments from a sedentary position, he compares the European Union to Lavrov and Russia. I have to say, I think that's an entirely inapposite comparison. These are our friends. These are our partners. To compare them, I think, to Russia today is quite extraordinary. And we should say that we appreciate the good work that is done, that is being done to protect the rights of citizens on either side of the Channel. But we must be clear. We must be clear that we will not accept the backstop. Because it is nonsensical to claim that this backstop is somehow essential for further progress in the negotiations. And the question of the Irish border is for the future partnership and not the withdrawal agreement. It was always absurd that it should be imported into this section of the negotiations. And we should use the implementation period to negotiate that future partnership, as I believe the government itself envisages. And by the way, we should withhold at least half of that £39 billion until the negotiation is concluded, the negotiation on the new partnership. And I think if we did that, I hope that answers your question.
That's a big idea.
I think it's certainly better than your idea. I believe the EU will sense. I will give way with pleasure.
The right honourable gentleman for giving way. It's a simple question. Is the deal that's currently on the table better or worse than staying in the European Union?
I'm afraid it's a finely balanced question, and much will depend. Much will depend on what happens. Much will depend on what happens after the vote on Tuesday. And I believe that if we say what I propose, the EU will understand that the government has found its resolve and is willing to be tough at last, and I believe the EU will do a deal on those terms. But in case they aren't, and I think I'm going to anticipate my right honourable friend's question. I bet I know what he's going to say. In case they do not agree, we must be absolutely emphatic now that we are preparing urgently for the possibility that we will indeed have to leave before we reach a final agreement. And yes, I'll give way.
I mean, what we're voting on is a withdrawal agreement on 3 points that have to be settled before the big, wide, grown-up negotiations start on the future relationship, on a very wide agenda over the next few years. What he is suggesting is we reject this withdrawal agreement now, in December, before we march leave. We go back and say we're not going to pay our contribution to any legal liabilities and any continued access, and we're not at this stage going to guarantee an open border in Ireland. Does he think there's the faintest chance of that being listened to seriously by any other member government? And isn't he just dooming us, if he gets his way, to rush to a catastrophic no-deal?
I must say I don't agree with that at all. I think obviously we should state, which is agreed amongst all, that there will be no hard border in Northern Ireland. All sides agree to that. As for the legal liabilities to pay the £39 billion, those are, to say the least, contested. And I believe that it is additionally vital to do what we've failed to do so far, and that's to show that we have the conviction and the willingness to leave without an agreement. And yes, I agree that will mean a great national effort if it comes to that point. And yes, it will mean that we have to make sure that we can get all the goods to our ports in addition to Dover, and we'll have to ensure that the planes can fly and to address all those other questions. And by the way, I will come to all of them.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for finally giving way, and he's presenting an illusion of the EU not being good for the UK. I would just ask him to think Euratom is not good for the UK, and if so, can he explain to those currently waiting for cancer diagnosis and treatment where they are going to get their radioactive sources from?
I'm glad to have given way, because I really think that that's the kind of scaremongering about the consequences of leaving the EU that really does no favours, I must say respectfully, to the debate. And I think that the Treasury will have an opportunity to ensure that this is in the event of no deal, in the event of coming out without an agreement. The Treasury will have the opportunity to use that £39 billion to ensure that we can support the economy rather than talking it down. And I believe it will be far better. It would be far better to make that effort now and at least be responsible for our destiny than to agree to give up our right to self-government forever, because that's effectively what we were doing, just because of our lack of short-term competence or confidence. And quite right, just 1 second. Quite frankly, the EU will not treat us as a sovereign equal in these negotiations unless and until we are willing to stand up for our own interests now and in the future. And I tell you, Mr. Speaker, I think our country is ready for us to take this stand. I think they are, because I think they've had enough of being told that we can't do it, that the 5th or 6th biggest economy in the world is not strong enough to run itself. And if we fail now, Mr. Speaker, it won't be good enough. I've given away a great deal. I've given away a great deal. I've given away a great deal. It won't be good enough to say to the fishermen, our fishermen, that we can't actually take back control of our fish because in the end it all proved to be too difficult. And it won't be good enough to say to the people of Northern Ireland that after all those promises, to the people of Northern Ireland, after all those promises, we accept that they must be treated differently from the rest of the UK, and I will give way.
I'm very grateful. He talks about the avoidance of a hard border in Northern Ireland. Speaking to the DUP conference at the weekend, he said that if Great Britain chose to vary regulations, there would be need for regulatory checks and customs borders between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Does he accept then, in some future world where the United Kingdom can vary its regulations as a whole, that would inevitably lead to regulatory checks between Northern Ireland and the rest of Ireland?
It is certainly, as Michel Barnier, I'm very glad that my honourable friend has raised that point, because it's a very, very important point. And Michel Barnier has himself said that the technical solutions to implement such regulatory checks, not necessarily customs checks, but regulatory checks away from the frontier can be found. And that is what we should be doing. And frankly, that is what we should have been doing for the last 2 years. That is where our effort and our energy should have gone. And on that point of regulation, it won't be good enough. It won't be good enough to tell the people of Northern Ireland that they're going to be treated differently. It won't be good enough to tell the business people of the UK, that now and in the future, they are going to be burdened. With regulation emanating from Brussels, over which we will have absolutely no control, and we couldn't stop it because we couldn't see an alternative. And I must say to colleagues that if colleagues think that it is too disruptive to go now for the Super Canada option, if colleagues think it is going to be too disruptive to go for freedom now, just you wait until you feel the popular reaction that will follow when people realise that the referendum has been betrayed. And the tragedy, I'll give way with pleasure to my right honourable friend.
Honourable friend for giving way. Could he tell us how his cunning plan, which ends up with no deal, will secure the 485,000 jobs that rely on the automotive sector and the just-in-time supply chains, which he first heard about 6 months ago from the Secretary of State for Business and Industrial Strategy?
I won't comment on when I heard about just-in-time supply chains. It was many, many years ago. But the objective, as she knows, is to create a zero-tariff, zero-quota deal with the EU, which is readily deliverable when you consider that we already have zero tariffs and zero quotas. And as for her anxiety about job losses, I have to say that we've already heard a lot of prophecies about losses of jobs. I think it was said that we were going to lose 500,000 jobs in this country if the British people had the temerity to vote leave. Actually, we gained 800,000 jobs. So I take these prophecies, I'm afraid, with a pinch of salt. And the sad thing is, that too many people, indeed some of the people who've been negotiating this deal, seem to regard Brexit as a disaster to be managed rather than an opportunity. And I'm afraid they also see bad news. They see bad news as a vindication of that judgment and actually talk up bad news as a result. And in taking that attitude, I'm afraid they are badly misunderstanding the instincts of the people of this country, who didn't vote for Brexit out of hate. They didn't vote for Brexit out of hate, as I think the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff tweeted after the referendum. But they voted to take back control of our laws because they believe, and I think rightly, that if we govern ourselves and if we legislate in the interests of the UK economy, then they have a better chance. They have a better chance of good jobs and higher wages and cheaper food and clothes and a brighter future, all of which are possible under a proper Brexit, and none of which can be delivered by this deal. And above all, if we vote through this apology for Brexit, we will be showing that we have treated the 17.4 million people, the highest number of people ever to vote for a single proposition, with contempt. With contempt. We will be turning our backs on those people. And this country must understand that when the people of this country voted to leave in 2016, they voted for change. They did not vote for an endless transition or a thinly disguised version of the status quo. They voted for freedom, and they voted for independence, and they voted for a better Britain. And for a country where politicians actually listen to what the people say. And I may say to the House that if we try to cheat them now, as I fear that we are trying to cheat them, they will spot it and they will never forgive us.
Miss Rhian Blackford.
That was Boris Johnson, and you can see that debate continuing on BBC Parliament. We're going to continue listening as the SNP leader, Ian Blackford, makes his points. We'll continue listening to this live debate in the House of Commons after the government has been defeated 3 times tonight. More on that later. Let's listen in.
The reality of Brexit is now laid before us. Broken promises of taking back control from a government that is so out of control. 21 ministerial resignations, communities, countries, households divided, our politics stay. A Prime Minister fighting for her political life. Mr. Speaker, the past number of months have been filled with political drama, theatre, squabbles and chaos. From crisis to crisis, this government hangs on by a thread. But beneath all of this is the real reality, the hard, cold truth that this is a moment of self-harm in our history. History has a way of teaching us lessons, if only we would listen. At a moment such as this, I reflect on someone that we regard as an icon. Winnie Ewing, Madam McCoss, who came into this House 51 years ago for the seat of Hamilton, represented the Highlands and Islands at the European Parliament and fought hard to make sure that Scotland benefited from its membership of the European Parliament. Something I can see right throughout my constituency, with all the signs of projects that were funded by European money. And we had a welcome year in the European Parliament, and indeed Winnie played such an important part in the development of that institution. We've heard of the importance of Erasmus today, and it holds a special place in the SNP's heart, because it was Winnie Ewing who chaired the European Parliament's European and Culture Committee on Erasmus when it was established in the 1980s. That's the legacy of someone that fought hard to make sure that all of us benefited from that European membership. And if I can contrast the approach that we've had from Europe with this place, and I want to quote from the great lady herself: "Time after time, on matters great and small, we are still standing on the sidelines, mutely accepting what is decided elsewhere, instead of raising our voices and making our own choices." Scotland's much vaunted partnership of Jonah and the whale. Mr. Speaker, respect for human dignity, human rights, freedom, democracy, equality and the rule of law. These are the core values of the European Union. Values that have united, not divided us as citizens of Europe now for many years. Values that are now ingrained in our society, to be cherished and protected, not discarded or eroded. I am proud and privileged to be a citizen of the European Union. Mr. Speaker, the European Union has been the greatest peace project in our lifetime. A peace project born out of the horrors of 2 world wars that ripped Europe apart. A project that has gone on to change the course of our communities and improve citizens' rights and opportunities across the continent, not just now. A project that I still believe is worth defending, and we will, on these benches, defend that. A project that has enabled our generations to travel, to work, to live and to thrive across all countries that are within the European Union. Mr. Speaker, today I come here with a heavy heart, with the deepest regret that the opportunities that I had to work in Amsterdam, but also to travel throughout Europe in my working career, to learn from the best and the brightest across Europe, will be taken from our children. Because that's what we're doing. Embracing the diversity of European culture has enriched so many of us.
Absolutely.
The exciting opportunities to live and work in Amsterdam or Barcelona or Brussels or Berlin or Copenhagen or Vienna or so many other places. So many choices and opportunities that our generation had to work friendships across Europe. Mr. Speaker, to learn from the rich diversity that Europe has to offer, to benefit from the experiences of different cultures, to form friendships with those like us who celebrated being European citizens with shared rights. The right to live and work across the EU is to be ended as a right for the next generation. Mr. Speaker, I have in the gallery today an ex-colleague from Amsterdam when I worked for a bakery ingredients company, someone whose friendship was formed out of the opportunity that I had to work in Amsterdam. Our friendship is a celebration of the success of the opportunities the EU membership gave to all of us. That right to live and work together across the EU is to be ended as a right for the next generation. That automatic right to benefit from career opportunities to be removed. Opportunities to benefit from an inclusive Europe swapped for the constraints of an inward-looking United Kingdom. I'll give way to the...
I thank my right honourable friend giving way. Most people in this chamber know that my husband is German. What not all of them will know is that his mother
You're
was
watching BBC News. We've been live in the House of Commons for hours of political drama this evening. You can watch that debate continuing on the BBC Parliament channel. Good evening. The government has been defeated 3 times in Commons votes on the Brexit process. MPs found the government in contempt of Parliament over its refusal to publish its legal advice on the Prime Minister's deal. In an abrupt climb down, the Commons leader, Andrea Leadsom, said the government would provide the full legal text tomorrow. Then the government was defeated in another vote, giving Parliament more powers to control the Brexit process if Theresa May's deal is rejected by MPs. Well, it all comes as MPs embark on 5 days of debate on the government's Brexit plans, leading to the vote next Tuesday, billed as one of the most significant parliamentary events of recent times. In yet another twist, the European Court of Justice has been told that the UK could stop the Brexit process on its own without EU approval. Well, the Prime Minister was on her feet for an hour this evening defending her deal. It's been strongly criticised by Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, and by the former Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson. And we can speak now to our chief political correspondent, Vicky Young, who is in central lobby for us. And Vicky, it has been an evening of real political drama and a series of blows inflicted on the government.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, this is absolutely not what Theresa May wanted. You remember, she's been on this tour of the United Kingdom trying to sell her deal, and then she was due to come here, of course, and sell the deal to MPs. You know, some seeing this as a last chance, really, to get the House of Commons behind her, to back her in that vote next Tuesday. But, of course, this was not what she wanted as the warm-up act, if you like. She had 3 defeats, I think the most that's happened in one day for a government for a very, very long time. And if we just go back to the first of those, this was a row about the government refusing to publish in full its legal advice, the Brexit legal advice that it has given to the Cabinet. The House of Commons last month voted and said that Parliament and the government must publish that. The government refused, and so they ended up today facing this censure, really, this motion saying that they were in contempt of Parliament. Now, in the end, that went through. The government was defeated on all of that, and this is how Labour reacted with Sir Keir Starmer.
This House has now spoken, and it's of huge constitutional and political significance. It is, I think, unprecedented for this House to find government ministers in contempt. The motion makes clear the government must now publish the Attorney-General's final legal advice in full.
Now, the leader of the House of Commons stood up and reacted to that, Andrea Leadsom, and she said the government had listened, and she said that they would now publish the final full legal advice given by the Attorney-General. She said the government will respond tomorrow. She didn't say they were going to publish it. She also said that she would refer the matter to the Privileges Committee because she said it was breaking such a precedent that she felt that they needed to look at it. Now, Theresa May, after all of that, went on to talk about the vote and saying that people had to get behind her deal. She said it had to be a compromise. At one point she said this argument has gone on long enough, it's corrosive to politics, and life depends on compromise.
We should not let the search for the perfect Brexit prevent a good Brexit that delivers for the British people. And we should not contemplate a course that fails to respect the result of the referendum, because it would decimate the trust of millions of people in our politics for a generation.
Well, the Labour leader responded to all of that. Labour, of course, not happy with the Prime Minister's deal. They have said that they will vote against it. The numbers not, of course, looking good for her. They want a closer relationship with the EU. Jeremy Corbyn characterises it as a jobs-first Brexit, but as things stand, Labour MPs and the Leader of the Opposition will be voting against.
This House will make its decision next Tuesday. I hope and expect this House will reject that deal. At that point, the government has lost the confidence of the House. I think they should reflect on that. Either they've got to get a better deal from the EU or give way to those who will.
But perhaps the most significant moment of the day was when 26 Conservative MPs decided to rebel against the government. Now, this was an amendment put down by the former Attorney-General Dominic Grieve. He himself wants to have a second referendum on all of this. But what he was trying to do was to look ahead to see what could happen if Parliament is deadlocked. If Theresa May's deal is voted down next Tuesday, Parliament can't decide what to do next. He wants MPs to have a much bigger say in the next step. So this amendment was put down, and in the end it was a pretty clear defeat for the government once again. And I think many people will look back on that as a pretty significant moment, because Theresa May's deal is voted down. It could be Parliament now that has a say in what happens next. And I think it makes the prospect of a no-deal exit from the EU less likely.